Hmm, there we go.
And if you want to go ahead and try and share, Renee, we
It says failed. Hold on. Sorry.
can. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. It's kind of, I know it's kind of dark, but
Looks fine to me.
okay.
Is that in presentation mode?
Um,
I mean, it's big enough. So,
well, I want to be able to see my notes at the same time. So I'm trying to figure out how to share the screen and be able to see my notes. And that is the best that I can do with having that black on
yeah,
the.
yeah, that's okay. That actually is a little bit better, whatever you did there.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Hold on.
For anyone just joining the webinar, we're just going to wait one more minute and let some other people join, and then we'll get started.
How's that? Better?
1 second, I'll tell you.
If I scooch over, then everyone can see my little Christmas tree in the background.
Well, that's nice that you decorate.
Yes.
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Okay, perfect. Oh,
Let's see, I just want to.
undo disturb.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Special Education Legal Clinic. My name is Mark Weicker and I'm with Abdenor Weicker. And we are 1/3 of the clinic. The clinic itself is a public-private collaboration between three independent organizations. That's Disability Rights Ohio, the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities, and Abdenor Weicker, like I mentioned. The clinic is staffed by volunteer attorneys, advocates, law students, and interns. And today on the panel, you'll have myself and Renee Stromsky, who's going to do the presentation today. And we have Kristen Hildebrandt from Disability Rights Ohio. By and large, Renee is going to lead the presentation, and then we'll have a few minutes after the presentation for questions about the presentation itself or general special education related questions. And we also have a Q&A box, which is available at the bottom where it says Q&A. If you have a question, you're welcome to drop it in the Q&A, and we may be able to get to it during the presentation if I can stop Renee and have the question answered, or we'll get to it at the end if not. And if you have any trouble with the Q&A, you can drop a question in the chat box, but we prefer if you can do it in the Q&A, that would be best. There's also a show captions option that should be available on your own screen. If you move your mouse pointer at the bottom, you'll see a CC button, and that will show captions throughout the presentation if you need those. A couple other things about the legal clinic. The legal clinic was started in 2020, and what we do is do a monthly workshop. And that workshop, we've done it now virtually for a couple of years. And that workshop is followed by 30-minute individual guidance sessions, we call them, which are individual sessions scheduled in a different Zoom room, a private room, in which the volunteer attorneys, myself included, answer questions related to specific scenarios, special education scenarios. And those are immediately following this workshop. So me and Renee in this case, and sometimes Kristen will jump off and then jump into those individual 30-minute sessions right after the workshop. And you can schedule those sessions the same way that you scheduled your attendance at the workshop, and that's through lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic, and I'll drop that in the chat box so you have access to it. Today's presentation or workshop is the fourth in our post-secondary transition series, and that started back in September. This is the fourth workshop, like I mentioned, and it's preparing for college post-secondary training, and that's going to be done by Renee Stromsky with Abdenor Weicker. And it's followed by 4 other workshops. Now, a note about the upcoming workshops, both in January and February, although we typically run every third Monday of the month. In January and February, we have holidays on those Mondays. So our next one's going to be Tuesday, January 16th, 2024, which is preparing for independent living. And that's going to be done by OCECD. And then Tuesday, February 20th, 2024, it's going to be on the transfer of rights, guardianship, and supported decision-making for adults with disabilities by Derek Graham, an attorney, and his co-presenter, Sarah Brooks from the Ohio Department of Education. And then we'll continue in March and April on the third Mondays as usual. And I think that covers all the introductory stuff. And we typically go for anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes with the workshop, so it may vary a little bit. We do have to end right at 1 o'clock so we can get to those individual guidance sessions. But we typically have some time in between the end of the workshop and the individual sessions for questions, like I mentioned. And if we don't get the questions that you drop in the Q&A, we'll try to get those answered at the end. So I think that covers it all. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Renee Stromsky from Abdenor Weicker, who's going to talk about preparing for college and post-secondary training in education.
Thank you, Mark. And if you don't mind, if you and Kristen and Amy can jump in at any time and interrupt me if there's a Q&A. I can't see really anything other than my screen right now. So if you can help monitor that for me, that'd be really helpful.
No problem.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, as Mark said. And also, as Mark said, my name is Renee, and I am excited to guide you guys through our discussion on empowering students with disabilities as they transition from that K-12 school setting to post-secondary education in Ohio. So I wanted to start by helping everyone understand the differences between K-12 and post-secondary education settings for students with disabilities. We have 3 main laws or 3 main regulations that guide our students with disabilities and protecting them from discrimination. The first is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA. Which states that each educational agency shall adopt and implement written policies and procedures to ensure that a free, appropriate public education, a FAPE, is made available to all children with disabilities. And then we have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which we'll just call Section 504. And then we've got Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. And both of those are pretty similar. You can see the language is slightly different on each of them, but they both essentially say that no qualified individual with a disability will be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of any services, programs, or activities of a public entity. So in the K-12 setting, we have students are entitled to that FAPE under the IDEA, and a FAPE is typically provided through specially designed instructions and accommodations tailored to a student's unique needs in the form of an IEP. Students who do not qualify for an IEP are still protected under Section 504 and the ADA, and may even qualify for services or accommodation by means of a Section 504 plan. These rights in K-12 are designed to provide a comprehensive education to our students with disabilities. However, in the post-secondary settings, the legal standards change significantly, and the IDEA no longer applies to our students with disabilities, and it shifts solely to the ADA and Section 504, where there's no longer that requirement of the educational agency to provide a free, appropriate public education, but to make sure that they are ensuring access to their activities, to the benefits of their programs. So rather than providing a comprehensive education in post-secondary institutions, these acts really emphasize those reasonable accommodations and, like I said, ensuring access rather than the provision of specialized services. So looking a little bit further in depth, you'll notice a big shift in student autonomy and responsibility. So there's a shift in the focus where in K-12, there's that focus, like we talked about, on providing a comprehensive education with specialized services outlined in the IEP. Whereas in the post-secondary setting, they prioritize equal access through those reasonable accommodations. There's also a transition and a shift in responsibility. In K-12, we have child find under the IDEA, which puts the responsibility on the school or the local school district to identify, evaluate, and provide services to our students with disabilities. However, in post-secondary settings, it's the student's responsibility to self-disclose their disability, request accommodations for their classes or whatever classes, housing, and we'll talk about all the different types of accommodations that can be available to our students, as well as managing their support system. You'll also see a shift in the parental involvement. Of course, parents are actively involved in that K through 12 IEP process. That parent is a mandatory member of the IEP team, whereas we don't have those IEP processes in post-secondary institutions. So it's the students who are taking more of an independent role and advocating for their needs. So sort of an outline of those rights and responsibilities. In that K-12 setting, we have students that have a specific plan, usually that IEP, that outlines specific services, accommodations, goals, and the schools are required to provide that specialized instruction, related services, and accommodations to meet the students' needs and their goals. The schools, also in the K-12 setting, the school's obligated to implement and provide the services outlined in the IEP, and they have to track and report student progress toward those IEP goals as we have our progress reporting periods. And of course, like I said, the parents play that significant role in the IEP decision-making process. And an overview of the post-secondary setting, again, it's the students who need to provide documentation of their disability, disclosing their disability, and make requests for accommodations from the institution. And when I say institution, it's because I'm using college, university, wherever they're going, just as a means to say that post-secondary setting. Institutions are required to provide reasonable accommodations, but they have a nuance in that they do not have to provide accommodations that fundamentally alter the program or create an undue burden on the institution. So that's the big phrase that we always look at, is whether the accommodation will fundamentally alter the program. And if it does, then the school does not have to provide that as a reasonable accommodation. And then, like I said before, again, students are responsible for initiating requests for accommodations and advocating for their needs over their parents. However, of course, parents can be as involved as they like in helping support their student accomplish all of these needs. So preparing for the transition planning process, it's unfortunately, it's probably really blurry and small on your screen. I've got a screenshot of Section 5 from the Ohio IEPs, which is where post-secondary transition planning comes into place under the IDEA. Like I said, this is in Section 5, and like it's very comprehensive, which is wonderful for us, but it makes it hard to screenshot it and put it all on one page. But that being said, that's something that you can look up on the Ohio Department of Education website for an example if you would like to see a clearer view. So Section 5 of a student's IEP, like I said, must include that post-secondary transition planning that outlines specific transition-related goals, services, and activities to help the student prepare for their future. As you maybe can see from the small writing, but there's 3 different sections within that Section 5 that address areas such as post-secondary education, employment, and then independent living skills, which is if applicable to the student, and of course highlight community involvement as well. So it's the IEP team's job to assess the student's strengths, their preferences, their interests, and any needs related to those transition goals. Transition planning can include targeted skill development transition planning can include targeted skill development in areas like self-advocacy, communication, problem solving, and daily living skills just essential for that independent living goal. Um, Schools can help students become connected with community agencies, support services, and resources that can aid in their transition processes. And I'll get a little bit more into those community agencies at the end of my presentation. But just some examples of some of those support services would be vocational rehabilitation services, independent living centers, mentoring programs, or other community-based supports. Schools will also can also provide information about the college application processes, disability support services available in colleges, and financial aid options are often provided as well. So the way that schools can do that, they can help provide access to College Credit Plus, which is a programs that some high schools have or can create that partner with local community colleges or universities to give students access to taking college level courses while they're still in high school and earning some credits towards college. Schools can help visit or help students start visiting schools of interest, as well as the disability offices at those schools. If I use the term DSS at all, that's disability support services, and that's what a lot of the colleges and universities refer to their disability support offices at their schools as DSS. So if I do say that in the future, that's what I'm referring to. Schools can also help, like I said, complete the FAFSA forms for financial aid. And then schools can also help provide information about the ACT and the SATs and requesting accommodations on those as needed. And now, just because, and this is unfortunately just because a student has certain accommodations in their IEP does not mean that they're entitled to them on the ACT or SAT, just because those are separate entities from the schools that create those testings. And they're not controlled by the school districts. They are the ones that get to make the decisions with regard to accommodations. However, the ACT and SAT um, do what's the word I'm looking for? They do allow typical reasonable accommodations, or approve is the word I was looking for. I apologize. ACT and SAT will approve some typical reasonable accommodations on tests like extended time, having an assistant to read questions out loud, or even having a specific seating arrangement, which could be, separate room, a quiet small group, or something like that are typical accommodations that they do approve of. Students in their post-secondary transition can also, or in their post-secondary transition planning process can receive support in developing job seeking skills, resume building, interview preparation, and accessing job placement services or job coaching if needed. And same with our IEP goals that are in section 6 of the IEP. Progress toward those transition goals must be regularly monitored and reviewed by the IEP team and must be adjusted as needed to ensure that they align with the students' evolving aspirations and needs. So there are, oh,
You do have a question in the chat or Q&A. What is the school's role in supporting prep for ACT, SAT? What happens if the school fails to request for accommodations?
the school's role in that is if you are connected with their special education office within the school district, they should be helping make those accommodations requests, but I think it is they can help connecting with the ACT and help making those requests for reasonable accommodations, but because it's separate from the school district, it is more of the parent's responsibility to make those requests for accommodations, and which is my understanding. And if they are denied, and Mark, you can jump into, and I know if they are denied, the accommodations are denied from the ACT, SAT, that there should be an appeal process through that.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing,
Okay.
Renee.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that helps answer the question a little bit. For identifying support services in post-secondary institutions, some steps that families can take to help identify those services. First is researching and contacting disability support offices, the DSS offices. You can visit the college or university website and navigate to the DSS page or the student accessibility services section. These websites often provide an overview of the available accommodations as well as the contact information. And you can reach out directly to the DSS office via email or via phone, and ask about available services, ask about the required documentation for disclosing a disability, as well as the process for requesting those accommodations. You can also, the next step would be to schedule meetings or visits. Parents can schedule a visit to the campus to meet with the DSS staff, and that would allow the students to see the facilities and discuss their specific needs in person. And you can also arrange appointments, of course, with the DSS staff to discuss accommodations, services, and any questions or concerns that you might have. It's also important to understand documentation requirements, like I said, asking those questions to figure out what type of documentation is required to validate the student's disability and request accommodations. This usually includes medical records, evaluations, or even IEPs from high school. Of course, then you can inquire about the available accommodations and assistive technologies. So when you're meeting with DSS staff, you can inquire about the range of accommodations available, something that I've talked about a little bit and that I'll get into depth into more on the next couple slides are some examples of accommodations that are available to college students. Just briefly, some of those are extended time for exams, note-taking assistance, accessible housing options, and more. And then understanding the process for requesting the accommodations, including the deadlines and necessary forms, because again, it's the student's responsibility in that post-secondary setting to make those requests rather than the school providing them outright as is required for K through 12. It's also important just because, inquiring about available accommodations, you don't want to forget about assistive technologies because there's a lot of assistive technologies available on campus. That can include screen readers, speech to text software, or specialized computer labs. It's also important, if available, within those post-secondary institutions to connect with peer support groups or disability support groups. Just trying to seek out information about any peer support groups or student organizations for students with disabilities. Of course, these groups can provide valuable insights and supports. Understanding the student's rights and responsibility, of course, which is what we're talking about today, but helping gain an understanding of your rights under the ADA and Section 504 in post-secondary settings is important, and what you're doing today, and making sure that you familiarize yourself with the responsibilities as a student, like we talked about, which would include timely communication, providing that necessary documentation, and of course, adhering to the college policies. It is, of course, important to attend orientation and information sessions. There will be, or schools sometimes should include orientation sessions specifically designed for students with disability, which often will provide that detailed information about available services and support on campus or off campus. Keeping communication open, of course, and seeking advice and guidance from others are very important as well. We want to keep those lines of communication open with the DSS staff and faculty, and regularly check in to ensure that accommodations that are in place are working effectively. And then it's important to also seek advice as needed from academic advisors, mentors, or professors who have experience supporting students with disability to, just keep the conversation going and make sure that the student is getting everything they need to be successful in their education. So I'm just going to talk pretty quickly. A lot of it's going to be reading from these slides, but I did want to provide some examples of college accommodations that we do typically see. This list that I got is from the Ohio State University website, their DSS webpage. They had a very comprehensive list of available supports that I wanted to share. And I can't say that these are available at every single school in Ohio by any means, but they are ideas of things that have been deemed to be reasonable accommodations that do not fundamentally alter the nature of a program. And before I start the list, I'm just going to take a sip of water. So, of course, we've got our typical exam accommodations, which is what probably most of us are thinking. A lot of these, there's 2 slides of accommodations, and a lot of these are kind of typical accommodations that we're used to seeing on our IEPs. So for exam accommodations, we have distraction reduced spaces, extended time, use of assistive technology, which I'll get into a little bit more detail in a second, as well as accessible formats, which again, I'll get into detail on the next slide. Using a computer or using Microsoft Word for any essay exams, a raised table, or having a reader or a scribe provided. Ohio State also lists note-taking support as a reasonable accommodation. They provide workshops and one-on-one consultations on note-taking strategies. They also can provide access to lecture slides in advance to aid in both preparation prior to class and as a tool while taking notes. And then they can also provide or are able to loan and train on note-taking technology apps to support that note-taking ability, like Notability, Glean, or the use of a LiveScribe Smart Pen. Colleges can also provide attendance and deadline modifications. So for students that have disabilities with random acute episodes, which may require them to miss classes or deadlines, disability services will approve for the student to be granted a moderate amount of flexibility with excused absences, exam dates, deadlines, and participation points. There's a wide range of options, of course, that can be utilized to best support the student needs. Several examples could be, several examples that the Ohio State University lists as attendance deadline modifications. They have a one-off flexibility plan as needed, which they utilize for students who have had a recent history of stable symptoms, but it hasn't really impacted their classes at all. They will have an intermittent flex plan for students who have recurring acute episodes or medical treatments which interrupt their academics for 1 to 2 days at a time. I think they listed as an example Crohn's disease as one of those disabilities that could apply to an intermittent flex plan. And then a remain in class plan for those students who are experiencing a prolonged acute episode or who have extended medical treatment. And just one example, of course, there's many examples. I'm only giving one here, but you know, a serious major depressive episode could be considered for a remain in class plan. And then, of course, like I talked about before, we have our assistive technology accommodations as well. There are note-taking technology apps like I talked about, like that LiveScribe Smart Pen. We have our speech-to-text software, which we can use in Office 365. Screen reading or magnification software, that Zoom text, or that text-to-speech learning tools like Read and Write Gold. So accessible media, like I mentioned on the last page, those accessible formats can help enable students who use assistive technology like screen readers or screen enlargers or text-to-speech software to make sure they have access to their classes. So that can look like PDF being searchable, rich text format, paper enlargements, braille, captioned videos, providing an audio description, like a description of narration of images, videos or graphs, or MP3 audio format, or XHTML format, which is our audible mathematics output format. The school, and this is again, these are all examples from the Ohio State University that they've deemed to not be fundamentally altering their program, but just examples of reasonable accommodations that could be requested from the university. We've got our sign language interpreting and transcribing. That pretty much speaks for itself, but they will provide those sign language interpreters or transcribers for students. They also provide consultation and advocacy as an accommodation for students with disability, which is awesome. Once registered with the DSS, a student can meet with their assigned access specialist to review the academic accommodations they have, discuss any concerns with classes or instructors, get assistance with any petitions for any non-approved accommodations, help them complete graduate testing accommodations paperwork, or just learning more about campus and community resources. There's also housing and dining accommodations that can be provided. I'll get into a little bit more depth about some housing accommodation examples. And that's something that they direct you to contact Student Life about because it is quite individualized. And dining accommodations as well. So again, I'll get into an example of that in a little bit. But there's also the ability to contact the school and determine what locations, maybe there's several dining, at least for like Ohio State, it's a big university, making sure that the student understands what dining halls or what restaurants or whatever on campus have a menu that meets their dietary needs. The school and schools should also offer disability parking and adaptive transportation. At the Ohio State University, they offer those ADA accessible permits, of course, for parking. And then they also offer Ohio State Paratransit, which provides that curb to curb transport. And then the Central Ohio Transportation Authority, I believe it is, COTA, they have Project Mainstream, which also provides curb to curb transportation for people with disabilities. And then, of course, we have a whole list of other services that can be provided as accommodations per Ohio State University. They have accessible classroom furniture, adaptive recreation, assistive listening devices, course substitutions, giving a student the ability to remain in full-time status as a student, even with a reduced course load. And then they also, of course, provide graduate or professional level student accommodations. So if the student is at that graduate or professional level, they can register again with DSS for both those general accommodations like we talked about, like extended time on exams, or accommodations or I should say accommodations that specifically apply to graduate level work. So some of those graduate specific accommodations can be accommodations for a dissertation, an oral defense, or a thesis, accommodations during a field placement, internship, or clinical, and then even accommodations for comprehensive or qualifying or candidacy exams. They have those available as well. For classes for courses that have labs associated with them, a student could request a lab assistant if they have a disability that prevents them from being able to complete the in-class lab requirements. The lab assistants will perform tasks that are directed by the student. However, they can't guide in performing the lab test. It's only performing the tasks that the student with a disability isn't able to perform. Some other accommodations that are under those other services that they can provide. They can give the student priority scheduling just to make sure if they want their classes closer together. So if there's like an orthopedic impairment or anything and they can't walk long distances, just making sure that they can get into the classes they need, or if there's a better time of day for them based on their schedule, based on their disability, making sure that they have priority in scheduling those at an appropriate time. They can even offer study abroad accommodations. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit different because we're talking about internationally, but they will work to make sure that there are accommodations that can be utilized on study abroad. And then, of course, accommodations for student life can also be provided. So students with disabilities can request accommodations in all areas of student life, which could include student organizations, student leadership programs, study abroad, like we talked about, campus employment or campus programming, and student employment as well. So I have a couple real life case examples just to talk about some reasonable accommodations that have been approved. The first two are from one of my colleagues because I typically practice in pre-K to 12. So I don't have any of my own post-secondary examples of successful advocating for accommodations yet. But my colleague presented a couple to me, and then the second two, numbers 3 and 4, are from OCR cases that provided resolutions for the students. So our first case, from my colleague, the student had an orthopedic impairment, and my colleague was able to secure a dorm room in a 15-story New York dormitory on the first available floor for students, which was on the second floor of that building. Again, the student had an orthopedic impairment, and because the elevators were often crowded and she was able to climb a minimal amount of steps, as most of the students do who live on the lower floors, she was able to secure that lower floor option. And the accommodation was also for the sake of safety, so that the student would be able to exit the building quickly in the event of a fire drill or loss of electricity. The second case was a student with Crohn's disease who had requested reasonable housing accommodations. In this situation, the student was assigned a dorm room where 3 girls shared one bedroom, and it was joined with another bedroom for 3 girls by a Jack and Jill type bathroom. And because of her disability, there were times that the bathroom was unavailable to her. And she unfortunately had some, embarrassing and horrifying accidents. And the other issue with the accommodations, or another issue that she was seeing, was that the university was requiring students to opt into the meal plan with no options to opt out of it. And of course, for those of us who have been to college, the food on college campuses is notoriously unhealthy, and of course triggered her Crohn's. So the student had applied for an exemption to the campus housing requirement and was denied. But we were able to successfully appeal, or my colleague was able to successfully appeal and argue that she did need to live off campus during her sophomore year so that she could have her own private restroom facilities and be able to prepare her own healthy meals. Cases 3 and 4, like I said, are examples that I found from OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, through the U.S. Department of Education. In case number 3, there was a student with a medical need requesting a reasonable housing accommodation. Case Western had the following policy. They were prohibiting the installation and use of any air conditioning equipment, and that air conditioners could be requested for medical reasons, subject to medical verification and approval from the Office of Disability Resources, but a $250 surcharge per semester would apply to any students who were approved to use that air conditioner for medical reasons. So the complaint, of course, alleged that the university was discriminating against students with disabilities in its housing programs by charging those students who need air conditioning as a disability-related service a fee for use of that air conditioner, for use of their accommodation. Prior to the conclusion of OCR's investigation, though, a resolution was reached, and again, this was Case Western Reserve University, and this is all online, so it's all public knowledge. But a resolution was reached, and Case Western removed the fee from their policy, so the students no longer were being charged for the use of that accommodation. And then case number 4, I wanted to provide an example again of a reasonable class accommodation, and I found an interesting case from Wright State University where a student wanted to participate in water activities for a scuba course during the spring semester, but because of his disability, the school simply said no, that he couldn't. He had even requested a reasonable accommodation. All he really needed was just a one-on-one support in the water. I believe he had, and some of this, was redacted because it's private information. But from my understanding, the student had seizures and wanted to just make sure there was someone in the water to ensure that if anything happened, the student would be okay. And the university failed to go through their process to determine whether it was a reasonable accommodation. In addition to that, the student had also wanted to use a list of mathematic identifiers, they considered it, but essentially a formula list of different formulas during testing, which was a typical accommodation he had received in the past. And the university had previously approved it as a disability-related service, but denied it for him. OCR had found that both of these were violations. Again, that scuba course was a violation because they didn't actually go through the steps to determine whether the course would, or whether that accommodation would fundamentally alter the course of that program. And then the list of the mathematic formulas during testing was determined to not be a fundamental alteration of the program because the teachers didn't think, or the professors had said that it wasn't a requirement that students necessarily memorize these formulas. So OCR found them in violation, found Wright State University in violation of Section 504 in the ADA in this case. So just some practical tips for success in the post-secondary education. I know we talked a little about that transition process and some tips for that, but more for that success in post-secondary education. Of course, early exploration and goal setting. It's really important to encourage self-discovery, helping our students explore their interests, their strengths, their career aspirations through assessments, job shadowing or internships. And of course, setting clear goals. And these two things can all be done through Section 5 of the IEP. But setting clear goals, guiding them, and setting specific achievable goals for that post-secondary education, employment, and independent living. It's also important, not just for post-secondary transition, but at all times for our students with disabilities, I believe, is to help foster that self-advocacy and independence. Developing self-advocacy skills by teaching our students how to communicate their needs, accommodations, and rights to support services in those post-secondary education settings and the workplace, as well as building those independent living skills by focusing on teaching skills for managing finances, household tasks, transportation, and even self-care. And again, Section 5 of the IEP goes to all of those things. Of course, understanding our rights and accommodations, which is what you're doing right now, which is wonderful by listening to this presentation, but it's important, of course, to know the students' legal rights and educate them about their rights under the ADA and 504 in those post-secondary settings, as well as exploring accommodations as we are doing right now, but help the student understand the accommodations that are available and how to request them and utilize them effectively. We also want to make sure that we are providing access and utilization of those transition services, again, through our Section 5 of the IEP. We want to ensure that our students are connected with the transition planning services that are needed, as well as the resources available through the school, and also community agencies and the vocational rehabilitation centers that are out there. Of course, we want to prepare for post-secondary education if that's the path we're taking. By some of the stuff we've talked about earlier, researching those college support services, exploring the disability support services at potential colleges, including the accommodations, whether tutoring is available or counseling as well. And then again, understanding the application process, which is something I've kind of harped on a lot today, but helping guide our students through those college application procedures, ensuring that they know how to disclose their disability and request those appropriate accommodations. We want to also make sure that we are developing our employment readiness. So we want to have and this again, Section 5 of the IEP. We want to offer guidance on resume building, interview skills, and job search strategies. And again, just encourage skill building in the areas that'll be needed for employment, which could be time management, teamwork, and problem solving. It's also important, of course, like I talked about earlier, to build that support network. We can help our students facilitate connections with mentors, disability support groups, or even alumni who can offer guidance and support for making sure that they're successful in their education. And again, identifying those supportive resources. So introducing students to local organizations and agencies that offer that employment training, job placement, and independent living support. And again, I'll get into some of those local organizations just in a couple slides here. Of course, and this is for everybody, not just our students with disabilities, but especially our students with disabilities, emphasizing health and wellness, making sure that we're encouraging self-care practices, encouraging those healthy habits, stress management, and self-care routines to make sure that students are able to maintain physical and mental well-being during the transition process. And finally, of course, this kind of goes into some of what Section 5 can do, but just practicing problem solving and flexibility through this transition, teaching adaptive problem solving to our students and coping strategies for managing challenges that they may encounter, as well as being flexible, just emphasizing the importance of flexibility and adaptability and adjusting to new environments and situations. So identifying some of the support services and post-secondary employment. This is just, oh, I said again, I'm sorry. It just looked so similar to my other slide. So this is actually just a little slide more focused on the post-secondary employment, because I know not all of our students will go directly to college, or if college isn't the right fit for everybody. So I just wanted to help everyone understand how to identify some support services in post-secondary employment, just because our rights are a little different there. So the first step would be to contact the Human Resources Department, of course, to determine workplace policies for individuals with disabilities. We want to reach out to the HR department to inquire about available accommodations for employees and ask questions to understand company policies regarding accommodations and disability rights, as well as the process for requesting support. We also want to assess our accommodations and accessibilities. Again, assess what accommodations or modifications might be necessary in the workplace and inquire about their availability within HR. Inquire about the accessibility of the workplace in general, including their facilities, their technology, or other work-related resources. And then, of course, our assistive technologies and resources that are available that can facilitate tasks or improve accessibility for individuals with disability. We can also try to ask HR about, peer support networks or employee resource groups. You can seek information about peer support networks or those resource groups within a company, those that focus on disability inclusion and support, and then participate in networking events or meetings organized by these groups to connect with those facing similar situations. Some companies will also have workplace mentoring or coaching programs, so it's important to inquire if that company does offer mentoring or coaching programs that could pair, newly employed individuals with disabilities with experienced employees for guidance and support. There's also can be training and skill development programs, so we want to check if the company provides training programs or workshops focused on enhancing skills or adapting to the workplace environment for employees with disabilities, and inquire about skill development initiatives tailored for employees with disabilities as well. And some of these I will get into in the next slide or a couple slides about some of those community resources that provide those services as well. So not just straight to the employer, but there are community resources where we can build some of these skills and explore some of these resources as well. We also have to be aware of our communication and disclosure in the workplace. We want to maintain that open communication with supervisors or HR personnel about any needed accommodations or support services, and understand, of course, the company's policies regarding disclosure of disabilities and how it might impact access to support services. It's also important to understand your legal rights and workplace policies that are in place for individuals with disabilities. Of course, we have Title I of the ADA instead of Title II, and sections 501 and 503 of the Rehabilitation Act instead of section 504. And essentially those are pretty similar to the language we saw earlier, except instead of based on education, it's based on employment. And then we also have our Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC guidelines that provide or that protect individuals with disability from discrimination in the workplace. Of course, and then at the end of the day too, you always want to review your company policies to ensure that they align with those legal requirements and provide the necessary support. And of course, which is what I've also been talking a lot about this presentation, but just seeking guidance and advocating for your needs, reaching out to advocacy organizations or disability support groups for guidance on navigating the workplace and accessing necessary services, and being proactive in advocating for your needs while understanding the available support systems within the company. Oh, I went too far. Okay, so.
And Renee, just real quick, so you know, it's 12:50 right now.
Okay, I'm going to talk really fast. I have 2 slides.
Yeah, no problem.
So just some potential challenges and solutions. Obviously, transitioning isn't without its challenging, so we'll address some common hurdles faced by students with disabilities in the post-secondary education setting and talk about some effective solutions and support mechanisms. So one challenge that we see is a change in support systems, moving from the structured support of an IEP to self-advocacy in college. It can be challenging. So a solution, of course, is to encourage early self-advocacy skills development and utilize resources like mentorship programs or workshops focused on self-advocacy. We also a challenge can be understanding available accommodations, because students might struggle to understand and access accommodations available in those post-secondary institutions. And the solution is providing guidance on how to request the accommodations, encouraging dialogue with DSS, and educating students on their rights under the 504 and the ADA. Of course, a challenge is always managing academic demands, balancing that increased academic demand of post-secondary education with potential learning differences or disabilities. And a solution would be to identify time management and study skills workshops, or adding that into a goal on the IEP, encouraging students to seek academic support early and promote the use of assistive technology as well. In terms of social and emotional adjustment, a challenge can be, of course, adapting to a new social environment and managing emotional stress related to academic workload and independence. And the solution would be to encourage the student to join peer support groups, counseling services, and social activities to foster a sense of community and emotional well-being. Of course, career readiness and employment preparation. A challenge can be preparing for the workforce and understanding how to access those career-related resources or internships. And that solution would be to encourage the student to access career counseling, job readiness workshops, and connections to vocational rehabilitation services. And of course, understanding disclosure and privacy. A challenge can be knowing when and how to disclose disabilities to access accommodations while ensuring privacy of the student. But that's where our solution is, to educate students on disclosure options, their rights, and the importance of communicating those with disability support services. And I'm talking really fast, so if you're rewatching this on recording, maybe you can slow it down, slow it down a little bit. But this is my last slide. I just wanted to provide you guys some resources in our state for post-secondary transition. We've got ODE, which offers, of course, our information and resources for students with disabilities transitioning from high school to post-secondary education or the workforce. They also obviously provide guidance on IEP transition planning and transition related services. We've got OOD, which offers vocational rehabilitation services aimed at assisting individuals in achieving employment and independence. And they can provide career counseling, job training, and employment support. We have our OTSP, which is a collaborative effort between ODE and OOD. The Ohio Transition Support Partnership provides resources and support for transitioning students with disabilities, including information on education, employment, and independent living. They also offer workshops, webinars, and resources for students, parents, and educators. The Ohio State Independent Living Council, again, focuses on promoting independent living and enhancing opportunities for our students with disabilities. They offer information on independent living skills, advocacy, and support services. Of course, we've got our accessible college programs and initiative. There are programs like Ohio Colleges to Careers, Ohio Link, and the Ohio Association of Higher Education and Disability, OAHEAD, which aim to support students with disabilities in accessing and succeeding in post-secondary education by providing coaching, career planning, and other support services. And of course, you've got your members of the Special Education Legal Clinic here. We've got DRO, which works on supporting individuals with disabilities and offering various resources, workshops, advocacy services that are beneficial during transition. OCECD provides the training resources and support to parents of students with disabilities, making sure they can navigate and advocate for their children during the transition process. And of course, AW provides the advocacy and legal services for students with disabilities that are being discriminated against by those educational institutions. So I apologize, I went super fast through those last ones, but that is the end of my presentation. I know I only left a couple minutes for questions, but I know we had some in the chat, but happy to hear any questions that anyone in the audience might have, or if any of the members on the screen right now have any questions as well, I'm happy to answer.
Renee, you did an amazing job. Mark, do you mind if I interrupt just for a moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
We just posted on the coalition's website a compilation of 5 videos that were developed by BGSU students talking about how they navigate success in college, and then we're working on our separate one that's preparing for success in college. So I wanted the audience to know that there are great resources on the coalition's webpage for youth that are planning to attend college.
Yeah, and I want to say thanks to Kristen and Amy too. We got a lot of good questions in the chat, more than we've ever got, but all great questions. We couldn't get to all of them, and Renee, your presentation was so full that we didn't want to stop you. But yeah, for those who posted the questions too, thanks. I think for the most part, I think we provided pretty good answers. I provided one answer that I had to look up and did like a quick 30-second research on, but and I thought it was a good question as to whether or not the special education obligations apply to school districts who offer a GED program. And my initial thought and answer was that, well, if the student has either graduated or withdrawn from school, even if the school district is providing the GED program, they wouldn't be bound by IDEA and to provide the services on the IEP. However, they would be bound by Section 504 and the ADA. And again, a good 30 seconds of superficial research seems to confirm that. I just wanted to mention that question in case anyone else has any other thoughts on that or has dealt with it. I've never had to look that one up specifically before. But
and something that I will mention that I haven't yet, just since we have a minute left, but for transition planning for the age of that usually starts at age 14. If during the IEP process, if that student is turning 14 within that year of the annual IEP review, then they should include that Section 5 updated with some post-secondary transition goals and services.
Yeah, good thought. And so some of those early things may just be a little bit of exploration about what they want to do or if they want to go to college. But yeah, absolutely, it can start that early. And yeah, lots of other good questions. So I don't want to shortchange anybody who put those in the chat box because there were good ones. And I think you largely answered this, but if accommodations are denied for any reason by the college, Renee, how would you go about, challenging that denial?
Yes, colleges and universities should have internal grievance procedures under Section 504 and ADA so that if you are denied an accommodation, you can go through those grievance procedures. If you're still having trouble with that, then you do have the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, OCR, where you can file a complaint about any denial of accommodations or any type of discrimination on the basis of disability.
Great, thank you. And one other question, all the workshops are recorded. So we'll have, this one's being recorded, we'll post it up. I was a little late in posting last month's, but we'll get both last month's and this month's posted within a couple days. But all of the old workshops that we've done since back when we started the legal clinic are posted with YouTube videos online and links right next to the titles of the workshop. So they are available if you need those in a recording, or if you have to miss a workshop, you can watch them that way. So excellent information today, though, Renee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for everyone else, we'll see you next month on a Tuesday. I get Tuesday after the third Monday of the month. So thank you again for the attendees, and Kristen and Amy and Renee.
Thank you, Mark, and happy holidays,
Thank-
everyone.
To you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.